Chapter 3 of Team Seraph's story continues directly after the events of Chapter 2. Zelena had just used her semblance on Sera and found that she had the power to bring great happiness instead of fear. Upon having this realization, the fear that she had felt of her own semblance and carried with her for years faded away, and the emotion overtook her. Sera held her close as she cried and stayed with her till late in the evening. Both of these characters, Seraphina, Vermillion, and Zelena Ray, are characters designed and created by myself, Phoenix Knight, but they are brought to life through the art of Hoshi Oujo. Links in the description below to all of Hoshi's socials, including her YouTube channel, where she does speed paints of all of the amazing artwork that she does, including both of these characters and eventually the rest of the characters on Team Seraph. So make sure to check her out and show her some love, as she is an incredible artist. Also, there are both of the individual trailers for each of these characters and 2 chapters before this one. I will link those up above. The cards have probably been appearing already, so make sure to check those out so you have the necessary context for the events about to take place here. But now on with the story. As Zelena was crying, Sera couldn't help but think how much pressure she must have been under each and every day. That if her emotions got even a bit out of control, her semblance might activate and subject someone to their deepest nightmares. Zelena must have put so much pressure on herself, and having that all release must have been a lot of strain. They stayed like this until late in the evening, until Zelena had worn herself out and had fallen asleep. Sera knew that Zelena's parents would likely be worrying. As she looked out her window, she saw that nighttime was already upon them. She tried to wake Zelena, but she was soundly asleep, so she decided that she would carry Zelena home. She had walked with Zelena enough times through Kakina to know the general area of where her house was, and an idea of what house was actually hers, so she decided that carrying Zelena home would probably be the best bet. As Sera walked through Kakina and got to the house that she assumed was Zelena's, she saw the moon crest over the horizon, and had a brief moment of worry that her parents might be mad that Zelena was out so late without contacting them. But regardless, she knocked on the door and waited for a response. And the response she got wasn't exactly one she expected. A man answered the door. Light brown hair, late 30s, early 40s, and was human. Sera didn't exactly expect that. Zelena hadn't mentioned much about her parents, and for a brief moment, Sera thought that maybe she had the wrong house, until she saw the man's eyes. The same piercing purple eyes that Zelena had, and she knew that she found the right house. The man was initially a bit surprised as well. It's not every day you see a winged faunus on your doorstep, and asked her, Can I help you? But then noticed over Sera's shoulder was Zelena, and he rushed over to where she was, wondering if she was okay. Sera, of course, assured her that everything was fine. She just had a very long and stressful day. She just fell asleep and thought it was best that she carry her home. Her father thanked Sera for doing so, and then Sera heard another voice from behind him, a female voice. Zelena, is that you? Are you home? And from around the corner came a woman that Sera could only assume was Zelena's mother, as she looked very similar, had the same green hair, a similar style of clothing, and upon seeing Sera, her tongue flicked out the same way that Zelena's did. She too was a snake faunus, and Sera knew that she definitely had the right house. Upon seeing Zelena out cold in her father's arms, her mother too got a little bit worried, asking if she was okay, and her father assured her she just had a long day and was sleeping soundly, and went to go return Zelena to her room. Sera was then left alone to talk with Zelena's mother. Ah, you must be Sera. Zelena talks about you all the time. It's nice to finally meet you. Thank you so much for bringing her home tonight. Sera, not really sure how to respond. Of course, sorry to keep her out so late. Zelena talks quite fondly about you as well. Miss Ray smiled at Sera and said, There's no need for you to apologize. Both you and Zelena have been out a few times in the past, so we weren't really that worried, you know, in your late-night training sessions and all that. And with that, Sera blushed and felt a little bit awkward. But I do have to thank you for everything you've done for our daughter this far. We weren't sure if coming to Vacuo was the right choice, or letting Zelena enroll in the Huntsman Academies. She's never been in combat before, or in any real situations like this, and she's had her own troubles in the past, but after seeing how much she's grown after befriending you and how much you've done for her already, we know we made the right choice, and we can't thank you enough for that. Sera smiles back at her, saying, There's no need to thank me. Zelena has done so much for me already. I'm happy to do what I can in return. She was there for me when I was lost. She supported me when she didn't have to, and continues to till now. She is an incredibly strong person, stronger than I am in many regards, and I'm happy that we can be there for each other. I know she will be an incredible huntress, and I will be standing alongside her every step of the way." Upon hearing those words, tears formed in the corners of Miss Ray's eyes. "Thank you. It means a lot to hear you say those words." And with that, Sera was feeling sufficiently awkward and decided that it was probably time to take her leave. "I won't intrude any longer. It's getting pretty late. I should probably head back to the dorm." But as Sera turned to leave, Miss Ray stopped her. "Actually, before you go, there is one favor I'd like to ask." The next morning, Zelena didn't wake up until almost noon. As she walked out of her room still half asleep, she could barely get out the word morning. Her parents were in the kitchen already preparing breakfast for her. "Ah, good morning, sleepyhead. How do you feel?" Zelena paused for a moment, remembering everything that had happened the night before. She felt great, and she couldn't help but smile brightly at her parents and tell her so. Zelena hadn't smiled like that in years, and her parents couldn't help but smile in return. "You must have had a pretty busy day yesterday for you to sleep so long. What exactly happened?" As Zelena sat down at the table, she told them. "We had a regular training regimen. Sera had a pretty big match yesterday, which she won, by the way, but we then had a long talk afterwards, Sera and I, about..." She paused for a moment, knowing how her parents would react. "About my semblance." Upon hearing that, her parents stopped and looked at each other. Your semblance?" Her parents knew full well how much Zelena disliked her semblance, and how much she tormented herself over it. She paused for a moment before responding. It turns out it's not so bad after all. Apparently I have the power to make people happy, as well as afraid." She looked up at her parents, tears forming in her eyes. "I'm not a monster after all." And her parents were overjoyed to hear her say those words. They had known that no matter how much they had told her otherwise, deep down Zelena still thought so harshly of herself. And as they rushed over and hugged Zelena, Miss Ray thought to herself that she's going to have to thank Sera again next weekend when she sees her, for doing something that they were never able to do for their own daughter. "Oh, and by the way, make sure you thank your friend the next time you see her." Zelena looked up at her mother. "Sera? She carried you home after you fell asleep, after all." Zelena hadn't even considered how she got home. The last thing she remembered before waking up in her room was Sera's room, how she used her semblance and the emotion overtook her. And she smiled to herself. "Yeah, I guess I will." The next week at school, things started to change. Zelena was a lot more cheerful, and for the first time wanted to learn more about her semblance. So whenever they trained, Sera and Zelena incorporated Zelena's semblance into the mix. She hadn't used her semblance that much in the past, so it was still quite draining for her at first, but whenever they could, they would try to learn more. So it was slow going at first, and it didn't really help that Sera was all of a sudden busy at lunch. Sera had told Zelena that the day before she had knocked something over in the cafeteria, spilling the food and breaking the tray, and in Vacuo, if you waste food, it comes at a price. So she had to help the lunch staff for the next week during her lunch breaks. Zelena wasn't exactly happy to hear that, but it also gave her more time to read. She had been at Oscuro Academy for some time and had barely touched any of the books in the library, and there were many that she wanted to read. So this was the perfect opportunity. The week quickly came to an end, and the Friday, Sera was acting a bit strange, a bit more awkward than normal, and once class was out, she took off before Zelena could really catch up to her, skipping training entirely. Zelena thought that was very weird, but instead just decided to head home for the day, thinking it was probably just Sera being Sera. But upon arriving at her house and opening the door, she saw her parents standing around her table, with some makeshift party hats on their head. The first thing she heard when she opened the door was, "Happy birthday, Zelena," and was immediately tackled from the side by Sera, who also said, "Happy birthday." Zelena was shocked and surprised. "What? How did you know?" And her mother told her, "When Sera came to drop you off last weekend, we asked her to come by today. You haven't wanted to celebrate your birthday in years, but we figured that it might be different this year." Zelena blushed as tears started forming in her eyes, and she couldn't help but smile. "You didn't have to do that." "Of course we didn't, but we wanted to," Sera exclaimed. "And besides, you haven't seen the best part yet." As Sera walked Zelena into the house, there on the kitchen table was a birthday cake, something that Zelena hadn't had in years. And as she took a bite, her eyes lit up. It was sweet. "Wait, isn't sugar kind of rare or hard to get in Vacuo?" Her mother responded, "Thank Sera for that one. When I told her it was your birthday, she insisted on doing something for you. And the only thing I could think of was a cake. You used to love sweets when you were little, and so Sera insisted that she would find a way to get enough sugar for us to bake one for you. That's why I was working with the lunch staff all week," Sera explained. "They promised to give me enough sugar if I worked for it." "That must have been difficult, given your wings and everything," Zelena laughed. "You have no idea. Initially, they wouldn't even let me step foot near the kitchen, saying that my feathers would get all in the food and everything. Luckily, I was persistent, though, and found a way to convince them. I had to tie cloth bags over my wings, though, so it was a bit uncomfortable." Zelena couldn't help but laugh at the thought of Sera having to cover her wings like that. "You wouldn't believe the looks on their faces after they turned me away and I came back looking like that. It was so embarrassing." Sera was laughing alongside Zelena, and Zelena's parents were happy to see that both of them were laughing together. "Well, now that we're telling some funny stories, we may have a couple about Zelena from her childhood if you'd be interested." "Mom, no!" And before Zelena could really get the words out of her mouth, Sera responded, "Yes, I would love to hear those stories." Upon seeing the excitement on Sera's face, Zelena couldn't help but relent and accept her fate. The stories and laughter continued late into the night, till long after the cake had already been finished. Both Sera and Zelena fell asleep leaning on one another on the kitchen bench. It was a night that none of them would ever forget. Over the next few months, things started to look up. Sera and Zelena had grown so close that Zelena's parents had started considering Sera a second daughter in no time. And throughout their training, Sera and Zelena continued to progress. Sera starting to be able to read the battlefield a little bit better, and Zelena starting to find a weapon that she was more comfortable with, learning more about her semblance, and the weapon that would work well with her fighting style as well as her semblance. That weapon was a whip. But as the second term was coming to a close and summer break was almost upon them, Sera was getting more and more nervous about having to go back to her tribe and face all of them again. It had been so long, and she was very nervous about doing so. After seeing the illusion of her father that Zelena's semblance had conjured, she became a bit homesick and started messaging her mother quite a bit more. Up until that point, she had only really messaged to make sure that everyone was okay and update her mother on the little things happening. But since then, she started talking with her more, talking about Zelena, more of her personal life, her training, and how she was doing overall, asking more questions, etc. And so, now that it was almost time to go back, she was feeling very nervous. But luckily, she wouldn't have to go back alone. As she was talking with Zelena about the entire situation, she asked Zelena if maybe she would like to accompany her to her tribe. And Zelena happily agreed, saying that this would be a perfect opportunity to not only meet Sera's mother and see where she was from, but also travel a little bit around the world, something that she had wanted to do since she was a child. One of the reasons she wanted to become a huntress is to have the freedom to travel around. Though she was also nervous as this would be her first time away from her parents. But she knew this would have to happen eventually, as becoming a huntress, going to Shade Academy, it would be best to experience these things in small portions first before having to take the deep dive going all the way to Shade. Of course, this was barring permission from both of their parents, but Sera's mom happily agreed, saying that there was plenty of room for Sera to bring a friend. Zelena's parents were a bit more hesitant, but considering the caravan that they would be traveling with from Kakina to where Sera lived would be guarded by a trained huntsman hired from the school to guide the students home to their respective tribes, they felt a little bit more comfortable about it, and did give permission for Zelena to go. After traveling across the desert for 3 days and 2 nights, it was a new experience for Zelena, having to sleep out in the desert in the cold, but luckily staying next to Sera with her semblance of heat sink, being able to heat up the surrounding area, it wasn't as bad as it could have been. But arriving at the tribe, Zelena was surprised. It was very similar to Kakina, a little bit smaller, but the huts were normally the same, and things were a bit less structured, able to be taken down at a moment's notice and a bit more mobile, but generally it seemed familiar. As they started walking through the village, Zelena felt a bit uncomfortable, a bit out of place. First her Mistralan clothing, but also the recognition that everyone had for seeing Sera walk through the town. She could see that Sera was feeling very awkward and nervous as she headed towards her house, but didn't really pay it any mind. Upon arriving at Sera's home, they had only so much as opened the door before Sera was pulled inside by her mother and held close. "I'm so glad to see that you made it home safely." Sera hugged her mother back, saying that it was good to see her too. As Zelena followed them into the house, she noticed that Zelena's mother was a wolf faunus, with spiky brown hair and ears that accompanied it. As her mother saw Zelena standing in the doorway, she welcomed her inside and hugged her as well. "Thank you for putting up with my daughter for so long. I know she can be a handful." "Hey, that's not exactly fair," Sera laughed. And her mother was glad to see that Sera had a bit of her cheer back in her step, though she could see that she was still a bit solemn, having returned to her tribe, the place where everything had happened a few years prior. After getting settled in, Sera had resolved herself to face the events of her past. For her to be able to move on from the event that happened 2 years ago, she would have to go and formally apologize to each and every member of her tribe. As she did so, Zelena tagged along for emotional support, but Sera apologized on her own. And most, if not all, of the people of the tribe responded quite positively, saying that she need not carry those burdens. She may have made the initial attack, but it was the rest of the tribe that decided to rise up. And many of them mimicked the exact same thing that Zelena had said prior, that if they had let the bandits take everything, likely they would have been in a much more dire situation. Many of the members of the tribe had already talked this out amongst themselves. While Sera was training at the academy, they had agreed that Sera was not responsible for this. Each member of the tribe made their own choice to fight that day. Sera just happened to lead the charge and did what many of them could not. None of them held Sera responsible, though not everyone felt the exact same way. Those who had lost loved ones still carried resentment and anger. Even though a small portion of that was directed at Sera, they didn't hold her responsible. Everyone living in Vacuo understood that life may come to an end in a number of different ways, and very suddenly. Bandit attacks are just one of those things that happen in Vacuo. Many of them were still sad, but had accepted the results of that day and had been able to move past it, and told Sera to do the same. But there was one person who had not yet moved past the events of that day, Mrs. Reef, who had lost her 5-year-old son during the grimm attack that had followed the bandits' raid. As Sera came and made her apology, the response was the hardest for Sera to take. She told Sera that she was still angry with her and didn't know if that feeling would ever go away. "We will never know what would have happened had you not attacked that day, had we just given everything to the bandits and let them leave. The grimm never would have come, and sure, many more people would have died, but my son may not have been one of them. I would have given everything I had to make sure that he lived, even giving my own life in return, but now I will never have the chance to do so, and for that I don't know if I will ever be able to forgive you." She paused for a moment and let those words sink in. She could see the strain on Sera's face as she was holding back tears. "I know you never intended for anyone to die that day, and you have carried this guilt with you for so long." Looking at the scar peeking over Sera's shoulder, she continued, "Now that you have come to face the consequences of your actions, you need not carry that burden any longer. You are young, inexperienced, and all you wanted to do was protect us. I will do my best to forgive you, as long as you promise never to forget the events of that day, and do your best to save as many people as you can when you become a huntress." Sera looked up at the woman as she smiled faintly. "The path you've chosen for yourself is a difficult one, and I wish you luck on your journey." Sera said her goodbyes and thanked the woman for her time as she walked out of the house where Zelena was waiting. She held her tears until they were a fair distance away, until she couldn't hold it any longer. As she stopped and turned towards Zelena, she buried her head in her shoulder and started crying. She had finally faced her past and could now start to move forward and become someone that her tribe could rely on, become a true huntress. And that opportunity would come a lot sooner than she expected. A few days later, a wandering jackalope was spotted near the settlement. Apparently this grimm had been causing trouble for a while, and the villagers had tried to fight it off time and time again, but they were never able to deal that finishing blow. The grimm was too fast, and its size just a bit too big for the villagers to be able to take it out. They had requested huntsman assistance, but for a search and destroy mission for only a single grimm, it would likely be a while before any huntsman accepted the job. Now that Sera and Zelena were there, though, the villagers requested their assistance. Maybe with their help they'd be able to take it out. Sera, of course, was quick to agree. She had fought grimm multiple times in the past, and now that she had more experience, she knew she would be able to help in this fight. Zelena was a bit more hesitant, though. She had shadowed other huntsmen in training from Shade Academy on their missions in her first year at the academy, and had some experience with grimm on the battlefield, but had never been in close combat with a grimm before. She knew, though, that this would likely be her best opportunity to do so, as she had Sera and the rest of the tribesmen there, and it would likely be the best-case scenario for her to get some real combat experience. So she swallowed her fear and went to the battlefield alongside everyone else. Sera had told her she didn't have to push herself, but Zelena was resolved. She wanted to be a huntsman just the same and wanted to stand alongside her friend on the battlefield to protect the people that she held dear. The villagers were a bit confused as to why Zelena requested a whip in battle, but they obliged and found one for her to fight with. It wasn't really a weapon that could deal a finishing blow against the Grimm, so they didn't really understand, but they soon would after seeing the battle take place. Zelena held back initially, while Sera and the rest of the villagers took on the jackalope. With its hind legs and its horns, it was a very tricky Grimm to deal with. Normally, the villagers would be able to surround any jackalope that came around or faster-moving Grimm, and use their spears to close in on it and deal the death blow. But this jackalope was a bit larger than normal. Standing over 7 feet tall, it was like a rabbit fresh out of hell, with its antlers sharp and pointed and its hind legs able to launch it across the battlefield. Their normal tactics weren't working against it. Whenever they tried to encircle it, it would just kick with its hind legs, disregarding the spears and knocking some of the villagers backwards. It was very dangerous for them to do so. As Zelena watched Sera fight, she could see that Sera was able to match the speed of the Grimm on the battlefield, dodge out of the way of the horns, and be able to counterattack. But neither Sera nor the villagers were able to get past that bone plating that the Grimm had and be able to deal much damage against the Grimm. Zelena could see that it was leading towards the same way that it had before, that they would have to settle for just driving the Grimm away and waiting for it to return another day. Eventually, though, the Grimm would return in the middle of the night when they were less prepared to deal with it, and someone would die. It was a miracle that no one had been killed already, but they had to find a way to take it out now. Zelena was still nervous about jumping into the battlefield, but Zelena remembered something that Professor Hawthorne had said in the past. As huntsmen and huntresses, you have your aura at your disposal. If it helps you take that first step onto the battlefield, knowing that you have this extra layer of protection, then do so, but make sure you do not use it as a crutch in battle. Your aura cloak is your last resort. It will protect you from a mortal wound only so long as it lasts. That is why we must train so you don't have to rely on it, and when you do, use it wisely. Zelena had her aura and the support of those around her, and with that backing her, she knew she would be able to step out onto the battlefield. If she did not do so now, it would only be more difficult in the future. She watched the battle as it progressed and waited for her opening, maneuvering around the circle of the villagers, and once Sera made an opening for her, she launched herself forward, using the whip to wrap around one of the antlers of the Grimm and steer it out of the way. She didn't yet have enough strength to actually flip the Grimm over, but it was enough to steer its direction and cause it to crash into the ground. She could see Sera smile, Zelena finally joining her on the battlefield, and the battle quickly turned in their favor. As Sera and Zelena fought, they realized that all of the training they had done together allowed them to read each other's movements on the battlefield. As Sera attacked, Zelena would wait for her opening and attack when Sera pulled back. They were able to maneuver around the Grimm and create many openings, Zelena using her whip to throw the Grimm off balance and Sera dealing some blows against it. But even still, they weren't able to land a decisive blow against it. At this point, the villagers were surrounding the area and letting Sera and Zelena do most of the fighting. Zelena knew, though, that they needed something else, that they needed some sort of strategy. She had an idea, though. She pulled back and told the rest of the villagers what to do. So, when she jumped back into battle, she told Sera of the plan. Both of them jumped backwards and put some distance between themselves and the Grimm as the villagers made a semicircle around it, spears pointed forwards, forcing the Grimm towards Sera and Zelena. As the Grimm charged the pair of young huntresses in training, both of them ran at the Grimm in return. It lowered its head, threatening to impale them with its sharp antlers, forcing both of them to act quickly. But luckily, they had a plan. Zelena threw her weapon out to Sera, and Sera grabbed the end of the whip. Both of them ducked under the antlers, narrowly missing the sharp points, as they slid across the sand and swept the Grimm's legs. It collided with the ground, sending a flurry of sand everywhere, and the villagers acted quickly in response. They all jumped on the Grimm, finding openings in the bone plating, and stabbed their spears into its flesh. The Grimm writhed in pain, and as it did so, it only drove the spears in further, until it finally let out a final screech and disappeared into dust. The battle was won, and Zelena was ready for a nap. The villagers thanked both of them for their help, and exclaimed that they both had the makings of excellent huntresses. Zelena blushed, and Sera smiled at her. Both of them had taken their first step towards their shared goal of becoming huntresses. But to hear more of their story and the rest of Team Seraph, that will have to wait until Chapter 4. Hopefully it'll be out a bit sooner than it took for Chapter 3 to be out after Chapter 2, as the Phoenix Festival tournament kept me quite busy, and it does take quite a while for me to film each of these videos, so hopefully Chapter 4 will be out a bit sooner. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this chapter, and I want to say thank you to everyone who has left such positive comments on all of the videos before this one, and especially to those who have gone to the effort of making fan art of these characters, like MJ Arin, who has made images of Sera when she was trapped in the fire that awakened her semblance, as well as when she was out doing missions as a huntress. They've also made an image of Sera when she was enamored with Zelena, seeing her for the first time, and Zelena sitting against a tree reading one of her favorite books. There's also Viper, who has made an image of Sera and Zelena sitting together, and Jamillion and Nannyyneveth, who have made images of Sera as she is cloaked in flame, and Maky, who has made an image of Zelena, and of course Painted Daisy, who has drawn the most of these characters thus far, going so far as to draw out entire scenes when Zelena offered to be Sera's new wings, and when Sera supported Zelena and told her her semblance didn't make her a monster, as well as other artworks on top of that. All of you are such incredible artists, and it means so much to me that you would go to the effort of drawing these characters that I created. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. It really means the world to me. Make sure you let me know down in the comments below what you think of each of these amazing artists, as well as the chapter as a whole. Also make sure you check out Hoshi Oujo, links again in the description below, as she was the one initially responsible for bringing each of these characters to life. She is an incredible artist, and make sure you go to her YouTube channel and show her some love. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this chapter overall. Make sure to subscribe to keep up with all the happenings on this channel and to be notified when the next chapter releases. Tweet me at PhoenixKnight7, join our Discord server. Either of those options would be amazing to send any fan art that you may have if you decide to go to that effort, or even email it to the email that's linked to this YouTube account. It means the world to me that you guys love these characters, as I love them so much as well, so hopefully you guys will continue to enjoy their story moving forward. And with that, I'll see you guys in the next video.